The morning sun barely touched the worn fabric of the green camping tent when Sarah Chun woke up to the sound of her youngest daughter coughing. The tent, which had become their home for the past 8 months, shook slightly in the autumn wind that swept through the vacant lot behind the old gas station. Sarah pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders and looked at her 3 children still sleeping on a makeshift bed they had created from old blankets and sleeping bags. Sarah had earned the nickname Dragon Woman from the local community, not because she was fierce or angry, but because of the intricate dragon tattoo that covered most of her left arm. The tattoo told the story of her heritage, her strength, and her determination to protect her family no matter what challenges life threw at them. She had gotten it during better times when she worked as a translator for the city's immigration office and could afford such luxuries. Those days felt like a lifetime ago. After her husband left them 2 years earlier, Sarah had struggled to make ends meet. The divorce had been messy, and he had taken most of their savings. She had tried to keep their small apartment, working 2 jobs while caring for her children, but when she got sick and missed too much work, everything fell apart. The eviction notice had come on a cold February morning, and by March, they were living in her old Honda Civic. The car had served them well for a few months, but when it broke down in this small town during their journey to find Sarah's sister in California, they had nowhere else to go. The local homeless shelter had a waiting list, and the few motels in town were far beyond what Sarah could afford with the small amount of money she had left. That's when she discovered the vacant lot behind Murphy's Gas and Auto Repair. Tom Murphy, the owner of the garage, was a gruff man in his 60s with calloused hands and a permanent oil stain on his work shirt. He had noticed Sarah and her children the first day they had pulled into his parking lot. At first, he thought they were just travelers taking a rest, but when he saw them still there the next morning and the morning after that, he realized their situation was more serious. Sarah's 3 children were her world. Emily, her oldest at 14, had the same determined spirit as her mother, but tried to hide her worry behind a brave smile. She had been the one to suggest they set up the tent behind the gas station, away from a main road where people might complain. Michael, 12 years old, was the quiet one who spent most of his time reading books he borrowed from the local library. He had become protective of his younger sister and often walked her to school each morning. Little Amy, only 7 years old, still believed this was all a big camping adventure and asked her mother every night when they would go back to their real house. Every morning, Sarah would wake up before dawn and help her children get ready for school. She had managed to enroll them in the local elementary and middle school by using the address of a kind woman she met at the food bank. The children would wash up in the gas station's restroom, and Sarah would do her best to make sure their clothes were clean and pressed. She had bought a small camping stove and would prepare simple breakfast for them before they walked the mile to school. Tom Murphy watched this routine for weeks. He saw how Sarah would sit outside the tent each morning, drinking instant coffee from a camping mug while she watched her children disappear down the road toward school. He noticed how she spent her days walking around town, go to every business with a handful of resumes, looking for work. He saw her return each afternoon with disappointment written across her face, but she would always smile when her children came back from school. The first time Tom approached Sarah, she was defensive. She thought he was going to tell them to leave, and she started explaining how they weren't causing any trouble and would move on soon. But Tom surprised her by offering something different. He told her she could use the garage's restroom and the small sink in the back office to wash up and clean clothes. He said it wasn't much, but it might make things a little easier. Sarah was suspicious at first. In the months since becoming homeless, she had learned to be wary of strangers offering help. Too often, there were strings attached or expectations that made her uncomfortable. But Tom seemed genuine, and his offer was practical rather than patronizing. He didn't ask about her story or would try to give her advice. He simply saw a need and offered a small solution. As the weeks passed, Sarah began to feel more comfortable around Tom. He would sometimes bring her children small snacks or cold drinks on hot days. He showed Michael the basics of how car engines worked, and the boy was fascinated by the mechanical complexity. Emily would sometimes help Tom organize parts in the garage after school, and he would pay her a few dollars for her help. Amy, the youngest, was completely charmed by Tom and would chatter away about her day at school while he worked on cars. Sarah found small jobs here and there, cleaning houses, doing yard work, babysitting for working mothers, but nothing steady or well-paying enough to afford rent and deposits for an apartment. The money she earned went toward food, school supplies for her children, and the basic necessities of life. She had applied for assistance programs, but the waiting lists were long and the bureaucracy overwhelming. Winter was approaching, and Sarah knew that living in a tent would become much more difficult when the temperatures dropped. She had started looking into other options, but everything required money she didn't have or documentation she couldn't provide without a permanent address. The stress was beginning to show on her children, especially Emily, who had started talking about dropping out of school to get a job and help support the family. One particularly cold October morning, Sarah woke up to find frost covering the outside of their tent. Amy had developed a persistent cough that worried Sarah, and Michael had begun having trouble sleeping because of the cold. Emily tried to act tough, but Sarah could see how the situation was affecting her daughter's grades and social life at school. That morning, as Sarah sat outside the tent drinking her coffee and trying to figure out their next move, Tom Murphy approached her with an expression she hadn't seen before. He looked nervous, almost uncomfortable, as he cleared his throat and asked if he could talk to her about something important. Sarah felt her stomach drop, assuming that their time at the gas station was coming to an end. She prepared herself for the conversation she had been dreading, the one where Tom would tell them they needed to move on. She mentally calculated how much money they had left and tried to think of where they might go next. But when Tom began talking, his words weren't what she expected. Instead of asking them to leave, he started telling her about his own life. He told her about his wife, Maria, who had passed away 3 years earlier from cancer. He talked about how empty his house felt now, how he rattled around in the 3-bedroom home they had shared for over 30 years. He mentioned the spare bedrooms that sat unused and the kitchen that seemed too big for one person. Tom explained that he had been watching Sarah and her children, not to judge them or find fault, but because he admired their strength and determination. He had seen how hard Sarah worked to maintain some normalcy for her kids, how she never gave up looking for work despite facing rejection after rejection. He had watched Emily help her younger siblings with homework by flashlight inside the tent, and he had seen Michael share his school lunch with Amy when food was running low. What Tom proposed next would change everything for Sarah's family, though she didn't know it yet. As he spoke, she found herself holding her breath, hardly daring to hope that this conversation might lead somewhere positive. The autumn wind picked up, rattling the tent behind them and reminding both of them how unsuitable it was for the cold months ahead. Tom's proposal was both simple and life-changing, but Sarah's initial reaction was complicated by pride, fear, and the protective instincts of a mother who had learned to be cautious about accepting help from strangers. The conversation that followed would test both of their assumptions about family, community, and what it means to help someone in need. As Tom continued talking, Sarah realized that this moment would mark a turning point in their lives. Whatever happened next would determine whether her children would spend the winter in a tent or finally have a warm, safe place to call home. The decision she made in the next few minutes would affect not just her family's immediate future, but potentially change the entire trajectory of their lives. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky as Tom and Sarah continued their conversation, both of them knowing that they stood at a crossroads that would define their relationship and determine the fate of 3 children who deserved so much more than what life had given them so far. Tom Murphy's hands were shaking slightly as he made his offer to Sarah. He had spent sleepless nights thinking about how to approach this conversation, worried that he might offend her pride or make her feel like a charity case. But watching Amy cough through the cold morning air had finally pushed him to act. He asked Sarah if she and her children would consider staying in his house temporarily, just until she could get back on her feet. Sarah's first instinct was to refuse. She had worked hard to maintain her independence and dignity throughout their struggles, and accepting such a significant offer from someone who was essentially a stranger felt overwhelming. She worried about what Tom might expect in return, whether her children would be comfortable in his home, and how she could ever repay such kindness. The dragon tattoo on her arm seemed to pulse with the fierce pride that had carried her through the darkest months of her life. But as she looked back at the tent where her children were starting to stir, and as she heard Amy's persistent cough, Sarah realized that her pride was less important than her children's well-being. Winter was coming, and she knew that no amount of determination could keep her family warm and healthy in a tent when snow began to fall. After a long pause, she accepted Tom's offer, but insisted it would only be temporary and that she would contribute to household expenses as soon as she found steady work. Tom's house was a modest 3-bedroom ranch-style home that he and his late wife Maria had bought as newlyweds 40 years earlier. The rooms still held touches of Maria's personality: flowered curtains in the kitchen, family photos covering the refrigerator, and a collection of ceramic angels on the living room mantelpiece. Tom had changed very little since Maria's death, partly from grief and partly because he didn't know how to reimagine the space without her. When Sarah and her children first walked through the front door, the warmth hit them like a physical embrace. After months of living outdoors, the simple luxuries of central heating, electric lights, and indoor plumbing felt almost magical. Amy ran from room to room, marveling at the soft carpets and the way light switches actually turned on lights. Michael stood quietly in the doorway, overwhelmed by the transition from their cramped tent to this spacious home. Emily hung back, her teenage skepticism warring with relief that her little sister finally had a proper place to sleep. Tom had prepared the house as best he could for their arrival. He had cleared out his home office to create a bedroom for Sarah, and he had set up the spare bedroom with bunk beds for the children. He had stocked the kitchen with groceries and made sure there were clean towels and bedding for everyone. But despite his preparations, the first few days were awkward for everyone as they learned to navigate sharing space with someone who had started as a stranger. Sarah immediately established rules for her children about respecting Tom's home and belongings. She insisted that they clean up after themselves, help with household chores, and maintain the same study habits they had developed while living in the tent. She continued to look for work every day, determined to prove that they were worthy of Tom's kindness and to become financially independent as quickly as possible. The children adapted to their new environment in different ways. Amy blossomed almost immediately, delighted to have her own bed and excited about helping Tom in his garden on weekends. She would follow him around the yard, chattering about everything she had learned at school and asking endless questions about the plants and flowers Maria had cultivated over the years. Tom found himself looking forward to these conversations, remembering how much he had missed having young voices in his home. Michael discovered that Tom had an extensive collection of books about automotive repair and engineering. Tom showed him how different car systems worked and began teaching him basic maintenance skills. Michael had always been mechanically inclined, but he had never had access to tools or someone knowledgeable to guide his curiosity. Under Tom's mentorship, Michael's confidence grew and his passion for understanding how things work flourished. Emily remained the most guarded of the children. As the oldest, she felt responsible for protecting her family and was suspicious of situations that seemed too good to be true. She had seen her mother disappointed too many times to trust that this arrangement would last. She continued to excel at school, but kept her emotional distance from Tom, treating him with polite respect rather than the warm affection her younger siblings showed. Sarah threw herself into job hunting with renewed energy. Having a stable address and phone number made applications easier, and being well-rested and properly fed gave her more confidence in interviews. She applied for positions at local businesses, government offices and social service organizations. She highlighted her previous experience as a translator and her multilingual skills, hoping to find a position that would utilize her education and background. After 3 weeks of searching, Sarah finally got a call back from the county social services department. They needed a translator to help Spanish-speaking families navigate the welfare and assistance programs. The job was part-time initially, but it came with benefits and the possibility of expansion to full-time work. Sarah was so excited when she got the offer that she cried in Tom's driveway, overwhelmed by the first good news she had received in over a year. Tom celebrated Sarah's job offer by cooking a special dinner for the family. He wasn't much of a cook. Maria had handled most of the meal preparation during their marriage, but he managed to prepare a decent meal of hamburgers and homemade French fries. The children were delighted by the celebration, and for the first time since moving in, Emily smiled genuinely and thanked Tom for everything he had done for their family. As Sarah began working, the household settled into a comfortable routine. Tom would wake early to open the garage, and Sarah would get the children ready for school before heading to her job at the county office. The children would walk to school together, and Emily would pick up Amy from elementary school and walk her home in the afternoons. Michael often stopped by the garage after school to help Tom with simple tasks and continue learning about automotive repair. Sarah insisted on contributing to household expenses from her first paycheck. She wanted to pay rent, utilities, and groceries, but Tom refused to accept much money from her. He agreed to let her pay for groceries and help with utilities, but he wouldn't take rent money. He told her she should save her earnings to get her family back into their own place when she was ready. The arrangement benefited Tom as much as it did Sarah's family. The house felt alive again with children's voices and activity. He enjoyed having dinner conversations and helping with homework. He liked hearing about everyone's day and feeling useful in ways he hadn't since Maria's death. The loneliness that had consumed him for 3 years began to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose and family connection. As autumn turned to winter, Sarah's job performance impressed her supervisors, and she was offered additional hours and responsibilities. Her bilingual skills were in high demand, and she began taking on more complex cases involving immigrant families navigating the social service system. The work was meaningful to her because she understood the challenges these families faced, having experienced her own difficulties with bureaucracy and assistance programs. Emily's attitude toward Tom gradually warmed as she saw how genuinely kind he was to her family. She began staying after school for drama club, something she had given up when they became homeless. Tom would pick her up from rehearsals, and during their drives home, Emily began opening up about her fears and dreams for the future. She talked about wanting to study social work in college to help families like her own. Michael's mechanical aptitude impressed Tom so much that he began teaching the boy more advanced skills. Michael learned to change oil, replace brake pads, and diagnose simple engine problems. Tom told Sarah that Michael had real talent and suggested that the boy might want to consider automotive technology as a career path. Michael beamed with pride at the compliment and began researching automotive programs at community colleges. Amy's cough disappeared completely after a few weeks of sleeping in a warm, dry bedroom. Her grades improved dramatically now that she had a quiet place to study and enough sleep each night. She made new friends at school and was invited to birthday parties and sleepovers. Sarah felt a deep relief watching her youngest daughter finally, acting like a normal 7-year-old child instead of a refugee from adult problems. The first major test of their living arrangement came in December when Sarah's ex-husband contacted her demanding to see the children for Christmas. Sarah hadn't heard from him in over a year, and his sudden interest in the children coincided suspiciously with his mother's death and a small inheritance he had received. Sarah was furious that he wanted to play father after abandoning them when they needed him most. Tom found Sarah crying in the kitchen one evening after she had gotten off the phone with her ex-husband. She explained the situation, and her fear that he might try to take the children away now that she was getting back on her feet. Tom listened carefully and then offered to help her contact a family law attorney he knew through his insurance agent. He offered to pay for legal consultation to make sure Sarah's rights as a parent were protected. The attorney assured Sarah that her ex-husband's abandonment of the family and failure to pay child support severely limited his legal rights to the children. Since he had initiated no contact for over a year and had provided no financial support, the court would be unlikely to grant him anything more than supervised visitation, and only if he could prove he was now financially stable and committed to being part of the children's lives. Sarah decided to allow her ex-husband to visit the children at Tom's house for a few hours on Christmas Eve. She wanted her children to have the opportunity to see their father if they chose to, but she wasn't comfortable with unsupervised visits given his history of instability. The visit was awkward and tense, with the children polite but distant toward their father. After a couple of hours, he left with promises to stay in touch that everyone suspected would not be kept. Christmas morning was magical for Sarah's family. Tom had quietly bought presents for all 3 children, and Sarah had used her employee discount at a local store to buy gifts as well. Amy squealed with delight over a new bicycle that Tom had secretly assembled in the garage. Michael received a comprehensive automotive repair manual and a basic tool set. Emily got a laptop computer that Tom said she would need for high school and college applications. Sarah gave Tom a photo album she had created featuring pictures of her family over the past few months. She had included photos of the children helping in the garden, Michael working in the garage, and all of them decorating for Christmas. On the first page, she had written a letter thanking him for giving them not just a house, but a home where they could rebuild their lives and dreams. Tom was deeply moved by the gift and by the realization that these 4 people had become his family in a way he had never expected. He told Sarah that helping them had given his life meaning again, and that he couldn't imagine the house without their energy and laughter. He said that Maria would have loved all of them and would have been proud of what they had built together. As winter deepened and they approached the new year, Sarah began thinking seriously about their long-term future. Her job had expanded to full-time with benefits, and she was earning enough money to afford a modest apartment for her family. But the thought of leaving Tom alone in his big house troubled her, and she could see that her children had formed strong bonds with the man who had rescued them from their tent behind the gas station. Spring arrived earlier than usual that year, bringing with it new possibilities and difficult decisions for Sarah and her children. Sarah's job had expanded beyond her initial part-time position, and she was now working full-time as a senior translator and case coordinator for the county social services department. Her supervisor had praised her work and mentioned the possibility of promoting her to a supervisory role that would come with a significant salary increase and additional benefits. The financial stability allowed Sarah to start seriously planning for their future. She had saved enough money for a security deposit and first month's rent on a modest apartment across town. She had even looked at a few places and found a 3-bedroom unit in a safe neighborhood with good schools. But every time she imagined telling Tom they were moving out, she felt a knot in her stomach that had nothing to do with finances or logistics. The truth was that Tom had become much more than a temporary landlord or benefactor to their family. He had become a grandfather figure to her children and a trusted friend to Sarah herself. He remembered important events like school concerts and soccer games. He helped with homework when Sarah worked late. He taught Michael automotive skills that the boy treasured, and he listened to Emily's teenage problems with patience and wisdom. Most importantly, he had shown Amy what it meant to have a stable, caring adult male figure in her life. Tom, meanwhile, was struggling with his own emotions about the possibility of Sarah's family moving out. The house had come alive again over the past months, filled with the sounds of children's laughter, dinner table conversations, and the comfortable rhythms of family life. He had grown to love Sarah's children as if they were his own grandchildren, and He respected Sarah enormously for her strength, determination, and the way she had raised her kids despite overwhelming challenges. But Tom was also aware that Sarah needed to rebuild her independence and self-sufficiency. He understood her pride and her desire to provide for her children without depending on anyone else. He had watched her carefully budget every dollar and work extra hours whenever possible to contribute to household expenses, despite his protest that she was already contributing far more than rent money through her presence and help around the house. The conversation about their future began indirectly through small comments and observations. Sarah would mention apartments she had seen advertised in the newspaper. Tom would talk about projects around the house that needed attention. Emily would wonder aloud about whether they would stay in the same school district. Michael would ask Tom if he could continue learning automotive repair even if they moved away. The turning point came on a warm April evening when Amy had a nightmare and woke up crying. She had dreamed that they were back in the tent and that Tom had forgotten about them. Sarah comforted her daughter, but the incident made her realize how much security and stability the children had found in Tom's home. Amy, especially, had bonded with Tom in a way that reminded Sarah of her own relationship with her grandfather when she was young. The next morning, while the children were at school, Sarah and Tom finally had the conversation they had both been avoiding. Sarah told Tom about the apartment she had been looking at and explained that she felt ready financially to move out on her own. She thanked him again for everything he had done and assured him that they would remain close friends regardless of where they lived. Tom listened carefully and then surprised Sarah by making a counterproposal. He asked if she would consider a different arrangement, one where her family could stay in the house permanently, not as temporary guests or tenants, but as a chosen family. He explained that he had been thinking about updating his will and that he wanted to leave the house to someone who would love and care for it the way Maria had. He suggested that they could work out a legal arrangement where Sarah would gradually take ownership of the house through a combination of payments and sweat equity. Sarah was overwhelmed by the proposal. The house was worth far more than she could afford to purchase outright, but Tom explained that he wasn't interested in making money from the sale. He wanted to ensure that her children had a stable home and that Sarah had the security of ownership rather than always worrying about rent increases or eviction. He also admitted that he couldn't bear the thought of living alone again after experiencing what it was like to be part of a family. Tom's proposal included several creative elements that addressed Sarah's concerns about fairness and her ability to pay. He suggested that Sarah could make monthly payments that were less than what she would pay in rent elsewhere, and that she could increase her equity in the house by taking care of maintenance and improvements. He also proposed that he could continue living in the house for as long as he wanted, essentially creating a multi-generational household where everyone contributed and everyone benefited. Sarah asked for time to think about the proposal and to discuss it with her children. She wanted to make sure that staying in Tom's house permanently was what they actually wanted rather than just the easiest option. She also needed to process her own feelings about accepting such an enormous gift and what it would mean for their relationship with Tom going forward. Emily's reaction was enthusiastic. She had finally allowed herself to feel settled and secure in Tom's house, and the thought of moving again filled her with anxiety. She had made close friends at school and was involved in extracurricular activities that meant a lot to her. She also admitted that she had come to think of Tom as a grandfather and couldn't imagine not having him in her life on a daily basis. Michael was equally excited about the possibility of staying permanently. His relationship with Tom had become one of the most important connections in his young life, and he was learning skills and gaining confidence that he knew he wouldn't find elsewhere. He had dreams of eventually working alongside Tom in the garage or perhaps opening his own automotive repair business someday, and staying in the house would allow those dreams to develop naturally. Amy's response was the most emotional. When Sarah explained that they might be able to stay in the house forever, Amy hugged her mother and asked if that meant Tom would always be their family. Sarah realized that in Amy's mind, Tom had already become family, and the legal or financial arrangements were less important than the emotional bonds they had all formed. After a week of consideration, Sarah accepted Tom's proposal with some modifications of her own. She insisted on paying fair market value for the house, but agreed to a payment plan that stretched over 15 years with no interest. She also insisted on contributing equally to all household expenses and taking responsibility for maintenance and improvements. Most importantly, she suggested that they formalize their arrangement with a written agreement that protected everyone's interests and clarified expectations. The legal arrangements took several months to complete, involving attorneys, appraisers, and financial advisors. But the emotional arrangements had already been settled. Tom officially became Grandpa Tom to Sarah's children, and Sarah became the daughter he had never had. They created new traditions and routines as an extended family while maintaining respect for the memory of Maria and the sacrifices that had brought them all together. Sarah's career continued to flourish as she gained experience and recognition in her field. She was promoted to supervisor of the translation services department and began developing programs to help immigrant families navigate social services more effectively. Her own experience with homelessness and bureaucracy gave her insights that benefited the family she served, and she found deep satisfaction in helping others who faced challenges similar to what her family had overcome. Tom's garage business also benefited from the new family arrangement. Michael became his unofficial apprentice, helping with simple repairs and learning the business side of automotive service. Emily started handling some of the bookkeeping and customer service tasks after school, using skills she was learning in her business classes. Even Amy contributed by keeping the waiting area tidy and entertaining younger customers while their parents' cars were being repaired. The house itself was transformed over the following months as Sarah and Tom worked together to update and improve it. They painted rooms, updated the kitchen appliances, and converted part of the basement into a study area for the children. Sarah planted a vegetable garden next to Maria's flower beds, and Tom taught the children how to maintain both. The house became a true reflection of their blended family, honoring the past while embracing the future. 2 years after Sarah and her children first moved into Tom's house, they celebrated with a family party that included neighbors, friends from work and school, and other families that Tom had helped over the years through his quiet acts of kindness. Sarah realized that their story had become an inspiration to others in their community, and that Tom's generosity had rippled outward to touch many other lives. Emily graduated from high school with honors and received a scholarship to study social work at the state university. She planned to live at home during college and commute to campus, partly to save money, but mostly because she couldn't imagine being away from the family they had built together. Michael was accepted into a specialized automotive technology program at the community college and would continue working with Tom while earning his degree. Amy was thriving in school and had joined the youth soccer league, where Tom never missed a game. Sarah often reflected on the journey that had brought them from a tent behind a gas station to a secure, loving home. The dragon tattoo on her arm had once represented her fierce determination to survive and protect her children through any hardship. Now it represented something more, the strength that comes from accepting help when it's needed, and the wisdom to recognize that family can be created through choice and commitment as much as through blood and marriage. Tom's simple act of kindness had saved Sarah's family, but Sarah and her children had also saved Tom from loneliness and purposelessness. Their relationship proved that sometimes the most profound connections form between people who start as strangers but discover they have everything important in common. The mechanic who had stepped in to help a struggling mother had gained a family, and the dragon woman who had cared for her children in a tent had found not just a home, but a place where all of them could build the future they had never dared to dream possible. The story of their unconventional family spread throughout their community, inspiring other acts of kindness and challenging assumptions about what family means and how neighbors can support each other. Sarah began speaking at community events about her experience with homelessness and the importance of practical, non-judgmental assistance for families in crisis. Tom continued his quiet acts of service, helping other families in need while maintaining his modest, steady presence in their lives. Their story became a testament to the power of human decency and the possibility of creating family bonds that transcend traditional definitions. From the tent where it all began to the home they built together, Sarah's family, and Tom proved that sometimes the most important interventions in life come not from government programs or charitable organizations, but from ordinary people who choose to see beyond their own comfort and reach out to help when help is needed most.